My brother showed up at my spa last Tuesday, the one I built from nothing, after he took everything from me, sat down in my best treatment room, and told me to sign over 40% of my business, or he'd have me evicted by Friday. He didn't even recognize me at first. I want you to sit with that for a second. 7 years. 7 years of silence. Of blocked numbers. Of watching my own mother post family photos on Facebook that I was never in. 7 years of building something real. Something mine, from a single room I rented above a dry cleaner in Pittsburgh. And my brother walks through the door of my wellness spa, past the marble reception desk, past the wall of client testimonials, past the framed magazine feature from last spring, and he doesn't even know it's me until I step out from behind the front desk and say his name. The look on his face lasted maybe half a second before he replaced it with that smile. The one I grew up watching him use on everyone. Practiced. Easy. Like a mask he kept on a hook by the door. "Sophie," he said. "You look good. I want to tell you everything, because I think you need to hear how something like this actually happens. Not the version where the ending comes first and the pain gets skipped over. The real version. The one that starts with a will reading in a lawyer's office in Columbus, Ohio, 7 years ago, when I was 26 years old and found out that the grandfather I adored had left me something, and that something was already gone. My grandfather, my mother's father, had a small hardware distribution business. Nothing glamorous. 3 warehouses, a fleet of aging delivery trucks, and 30 years of relationships with contractors across the Midwest. He was a quiet man who kept his finances private, and when he died of a stroke in March of that year, none of us really knew what to expect. What I didn't know, what nobody told me, was that 18 months before he died, my brother had convinced him to sign over a significant portion of his liquid assets as an early inheritance gift to help him launch a commercial real estate venture, $80,000. The same amount my grandfather had separately told me, in a conversation I now replay constantly, that he was setting aside for me to start something of your own, Sophie, because you've always had the eye for it. At the will reading, I got $14,000 and a storage unit full of furniture. My brother got acknowledgement of the transfer already made, plus the family home, plus a small parcel of land outside the city. I didn't even fully understand what had happened until my mother pulled me aside afterward and told me in that gentle, matter-of-fact way. She delivers devastating information that my grandfather had changed his plans, after a long conversation with your brother, about the family's financial future. She said it like it was reasonable. Like it made sense. Like I was the one being difficult for not nodding along. He felt Marcus had a stronger vision for growing the family's legacy, she said. You know how Grandpa respected ambition. My grandfather respected hard work. He respected honesty. He respected people who showed up. I know because I watched him do all 3, every single day, for the 26 years I was lucky enough to know him. What he did not respect, historically, was being manipulated by a charming 31-year-old who knew exactly which buttons to press on an aging man who was quietly terrified of leaving nothing behind. But I couldn't say that. Not then. Not in that room. What I said was nothing. I took my $14,000 and I went home and I sat on the floor of my apartment and I let myself feel every single thing I was feeling. Grief. Rage. The particular humiliation of having something taken from you by someone who was supposed to be family, who was supposed to love you, and who clearly had decided, somewhere along the way, that what was yours was also available to him if he just asked the right person at the right time. My mother called 3 days later to tell me I was being dramatic about the whole thing, and that family didn't keep score. My brother sent one text, one that said, "I hope you understand this wasn't personal. Business decisions rarely are." I didn't respond to either of them. I took my $14,000. I took the small savings I'd built from 5 years of working as a licensed esthetician and massage therapist. I took out a modest personal loan, $9,000, standard rate, nothing dramatic, and I combined it all into something I could work with. It wasn't much. It wasn't the runway my grandfather had intended for me. But it was mine. Completely, legally, paperwork in hand, mine. And nobody could have a long conversation with anyone to take it away from me. I found the room above the dry cleaner through a client who knew the building owner. 400 square feet, its own entrance from a side stairwell, windows that faced west, so the afternoon light came in gold and warm. I painted it myself over a weekend. I bought a second-hand treatment table and a retail shelf and a second-hand reception chair. I built a website in 3 evenings, watching YouTube tutorials. I named it Luminary Wellness because I wanted something that meant light, that meant being seen, that meant the opposite of how I'd felt sitting on that floor after the will reading. The first year was difficult in the way that first years always are. I worked 6 days a week. I did facials and massages and lash appointments and whatever else my clients needed. I reinvested almost everything I made. I took a night course in business accounting because I couldn't afford to hire anyone to handle my books, and I refused to be ignorant about my own money ever again. That last part, the money part, I want you to understand, was not incidental. I became someone who understood exactly where every dollar came from and where it was going, because I had learned, in the most personal way possible, what happened when you didn't. By the end of year 2, I had a wait list. I hired my first employee, a massage therapist named Dana, who is still with me today and who I consider one of my closest friends. By year 3, I was renting 2 additional rooms in the building and had added a small retail section, selling skincare products I'd begun formulating myself. By year 4, I started having a different kind of conversation with my accountant. Not how do we cover expenses, but what do we do with what's left over? I want to be honest about something, because the comments on stories like mine always include someone asking whether the math adds up. It does. I worked constantly. I lived modestly. I made smart decisions and also some lucky ones. I also, in year 5, licensed my skincare formulations to a regional distributor. That deal changed things considerably. None of it was magic. All of it was compounded over time. In year 6, I learned that the building I'd been renting space in was coming up for sale. The owner, a retired contractor named Ed, who had always been fair to me, was looking to liquidate some assets before he moved to Florida. I had a conversation with my bank. I had a longer conversation with my accountant. I made an offer. Ed accepted it. I owned the building, all 4 floors, the retail units on the ground level, the office suites on the 3rd and 4th. I had moved my spa into the entire 2nd floor by then. I hired a property management company to handle the commercial leasing on the other floors. I kept my name off the public-facing materials. The management company handled everything under their own branding because I am, at heart, a private person who learned early that visibility and vulnerability often travel together. 7 years after sitting on my apartment floor with $14,000 and a lot of grief, I owned a building in Pittsburgh and a business that had been featured in 2 regional publications and 1 national wellness magazine. And then my brother walked through the door. He came in with his wife, her name is Renata, and she has the particular energy of someone who has always gotten what she wanted, and a man I didn't recognize who turned out to be her brother. They'd called ahead. They'd booked a private consultation under a different name. I found out later it was Renata's maiden name. I'm still not sure whether that was deliberate strategy or just the way she always books things, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I was at the front desk reviewing that afternoon's schedule when they walked in, and I saw my brother's face before he saw mine. So I had about 4 seconds to decide how to play it. I decided to let it unfold. "Welcome to Luminary," I said. "You must be the Hargrove party." He looked up. The recognition hit him slowly, the way it does when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing because it simply doesn't fit the expected context. My brother had last seen me at a gas station near our mother's house approximately 4 years ago, when we'd made brief and excruciating eye contact across the parking lot and both kept moving. He had not seen me in a professional setting. He had not seen me behind a reception desk that bore a tasteful gold-lettered logo. He had not, I am fairly confident, spent any time imagining what I'd built. "Sophie?" he said. "Marcus," I said. "It's nice to see you. Let me show you to the consultation room. I want you to understand my calm. I want you to understand that it was not the calm of someone who didn't feel anything. It was the calm of someone who had spent 7 years deciding who she was going to be, and who had decided, firmly, that she was not going to be the person who falls apart in her own lobby. I showed them to the largest private room, the one I use for VIP consultations, with the velvet chairs and the good lighting and the tray of complimentary teas. I excused myself, sent Dana to offer them refreshments, and went to my office where I spent about 4 minutes breathing deliberately before I came back. The consultation was supposed to be about booking a corporate wellness package. That was the stated reason for the visit, and for the first 15 minutes, that's what we discussed. Renata asked good questions, she's not unintelligent, and her brother took notes on his phone. Marcus said very little, which, if I'd been less self-possessed, might have made me more nervous than it should have. Then Renata excused herself to use the restroom, which I noted took considerably longer than necessary, and Marcus leaned forward with his elbows on the table and the smile finally dropped. "You've done well for yourself," he said. "I have," I said. "This location is great. How long have you been here?" 6 years in the building, I said. "Longer in the neighborhood." He nodded. He was looking around the room, looking at the walls, the floor, the details. He had always been good at assessing the value of a space. It's what made him successful in commercial real estate, which I will acknowledge he had been, at least partially, with my grandfather's money. "I heard you expanded to the whole second floor," he said. I didn't ask how he'd heard that. "It doesn't matter." "That's right," I said. He picked up one of the promotional brochures from the tray on the table. He turned it over in his hands. He set it down. "Sophie," he said, "I'm going to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty at this point." The phrase "at this point" did a lot of work in that sentence. As if there had been a previous period during which I had not deserved it and we were now, generously, entering a new era. "I'm listening," I said. He told me that he had a business proposition, that he'd been watching my growth, his words, and that he believed there was a significant opportunity in expanding the Luminary brand into a second location, possibly a third, that he had commercial properties in Cincinnati and Cleveland, that would be ideal. That with his real estate expertise and my brand equity, a partnership would benefit both of us enormously. He wanted 40% of the business. He framed it as an investment. He talked about synergy. He talked about scaling. He talked for almost 4 minutes in the smooth, organized way he's always talked, the way that sounds like sense until you slow it down and look at the individual components. When he finished, I said, "And what would you be bringing to this partnership, specifically?" "Access to prime commercial locations," he said, "and I'd waive the first year of rent at both sites." "You'd waive the rent," I said slowly. "As a gesture of good faith?" he said. "To get the partnership started. And after the first year?" He named a number. It was not a charitable number. I looked at him for a moment. I want to tell you what I was feeling in that moment, because I think it's important. It wasn't rage, exactly. It wasn't the specific burn of 7 years ago in the lawyer's office. It was something quieter than that. Something that felt almost like clarity. Like looking at a thing directly and finally being able to name exactly what it is. "Marcus," I said, "you're offering me the opportunity to give you 40% of what I built, in exchange for market rate rent in your properties after a 1-year grace period." He shifted slightly. "It's more complex than. I'd also like to point out," I said, "that you don't own the building you're currently sitting in." He blinked. "The management company that handles this property's commercial leasing," I said, "is contracted by the building's owner." I paused. "I am the building's owner." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it. Renata had come back to the doorway. She was holding her tea. Her brother had stopped typing on his phone. Marcus looked at me. He opened his mouth. He closed it. "I purchased this building 2 years ago," I said. "My name isn't on the public management contract because I prefer to keep my personal and business holdings separate. But if you'd like, I can have my attorney send over the deed." The thing about a long silence is that it gives everyone in the room time to understand the full shape of what just happened. Renata, to her credit, figured it out first. I saw it move across her face, the recalculation, the reassessment of the situation. Her brother put his phone face down on the table. Marcus was very still. "The lease on the second floor," Marcus said finally. He was doing the math. He'd probably been doing the math since he walked in, trying to figure out what leverage the landlord represented. The landlord he'd been planning, presumably, to invoke if I didn't cooperate. "You leased the second floor from myself," I said. "Yes." He sat back in his chair. "I want to be careful here about how I tell the next part, because I think it would be easy to describe this as a triumphant moment and leave it at that, and I don't think that's fully honest. It was something, yes. It was the specific satisfaction of having built something solid enough that it couldn't be leveraged against me. But it was also sitting across from my brother, who I grew up with, who I used to follow around the backyard when I was small enough to think he hung the moon, and seeing him look at me like I was a problem he hadn't anticipated. And that is not uncomplicated. I want you to know that it is not uncomplicated. I told them I wasn't interested in the partnership. I told them calmly, without elaboration, the way you decline something that was never genuinely on the table. Marcus asked whether we could talk about the family situation. I told him that today wasn't the day for that conversation. Renata asked whether I'd at least consider the Cincinnati property independently. I told her no, thank you. I stood up. I thanked them for coming in. I walked them back to the lobby, with the same professional warmth I extend to every person who comes through my door, because my business is not a place for my personal history, and I made that decision a long time ago. At the door, Marcus stopped. He turned around. He looked at me with something that wasn't quite an apology, but was maybe the precursor to one, the acknowledgement that one might eventually be necessary. "You really built all of this," he said. "Yes," I said. "I did." He nodded once. They left. I went back to my office and I sat down, and I let myself feel everything again, the way I had on the floor of that apartment 7 years ago. The difference was that this time, when I looked around at what surrounded me, the desk I'd chosen, the artwork on the wall, the framed magazine feature, the window with the Pittsburgh skyline, all of it was paid for. All of it was built from something he hadn't been able to take, because you cannot take what someone has already poured entirely into themselves. Dana knocked on the door an hour later with tea, and the look of someone who had been very professionally pretending not to notice anything unusual all afternoon. She set the mug down and raised her eyebrows once, which is her way of asking everything at once. "Old family stuff," I said. "Okay," she said, and she left me to it. I have thought a lot, since then, about the question I get asked most when I tell this story. Whether I've forgiven my brother. I don't think forgiveness is the right frame, actually. I think the right frame is something more like I stopped waiting. I stopped waiting for an explanation that was going to satisfy me. I stopped waiting to be seen as someone worth the honesty I was owed. I built the thing I was going to build anyway, because it turned out that was always up to me, not to him, not to any inheritance, not to my grandfather's intentions or my mother's approval or my brother's recognition. The business is mine. The building is mine. And what I know now, what those 7 years taught me, in the most expensive and also most valuable way, is that nobody can negotiate away what you build with your own hands when you never let anyone else hold the deed. My mother called last week. She'd heard from Marcus, apparently. She wanted to know if we could start fresh. I told her I'd think about it. I'm still thinking.